The small-town gas station sat under the dim glow of flickering neon lights, a quiet pit stop along a lonely desert highway. Inside, the scent of coffee and motor oil hung in the air as a few late-night travelers refueled their cars and grabbed snacks. The night was peaceful, until the distant rumble of a motorcycle shattered the calm. A black teenage boy, no older than 15, stood near the checkout counter, clutching a worn-out backpack. His clothes were slightly tattered, his sneakers scuffed from miles of walking. He carefully counted coins in his palm, hoping they were enough for a bottle of water and a snack. The cashier watched him with sympathy but said nothing. Then, the doors swung open. A large, burly biker strolled in, his boots thudding against the tiled floor. He locked eyes on the boy, a cruel smirk creeping across his face. "You lost, kid," the biker sneered, towering over him. "Don't think this place is meant for your kind." The boy stiffened, but didn't respond. The few customers inside averted their gazes, pretending not to see. No one dared to intervene, except for one man. Near the back of the store, beneath the shadow of a worn cowboy hat, Clint Eastwood watched silently. His weathered face remained unreadable, but his steely eyes locked onto the biker. He took a slow sip of his coffee, waiting, watching. Something was about to happen. Before we get into today's story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's get started. The biker stepped closer to the boy, his heavy boots scuffing against the tiled floor. The few customers inside the gas station stiffened, exchanging uneasy glances but refusing to get involved. "Hey, kid, I asked you a question." The biker's voice was low and gruff, laced with mockery. He reached out and snatched the bottle of water from the boy's hands. "You sure you can afford this?" The boy swallowed hard, his fingers tightening around the few coins he had left. He knew better than to talk back. His grandmother always told him to avoid trouble, to keep his head down. But this man wasn't just looking for trouble, he was hunting for it. "Hey, I'm talking to you." The biker gave the boy a shove, making him stumble back against the counter. A couple of the customers looked toward the cashier, who pretended to be busy rearranging gum packs. No one wanted to be the one to step in. At one of the corner tables, Clint Eastwood remained motionless. His hat sat low over his eyes, shielding the piercing gaze that never left the unfolding scene. He set his coffee down gently, his fingers tapping against the ceramic cup, but said nothing. The biker chuckled, shaking his head. "Pathetic," he muttered. "Just another punk thinking he belongs somewhere he don't." Behind him, the gas station doors swung open again. 3 more bikers stepped inside, his crew. They reeked of alcohol and bad intentions. The leader tossed the bottle of water over his shoulder, letting it roll across the floor. One of the bikers, a scruffy man with a snake tattoo winding up his neck, smirked. "What's this, Rick? Some charity case?" Rick, the main biker, grinned. "Something like that. Kid thought he was going to waltz in here and act like he belonged." He turned back to the boy. "How about you clean my boots with that change of yours, huh? Might actually be useful for once." The boy's hands trembled as he stared at the dirty floor beneath him. His breath came out in short, uneven bursts. The room felt smaller, hotter. A woman near the slushy machine turned away, pretending to focus on the machine's swirling blue liquid. An old man by the magazine rack shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The silence was suffocating. Clint Eastwood exhaled slowly. He shifted in his seat, just barely, but the movement carried weight. The faintest scrape of his boot against the floor made the cashier glance his way, then quickly look away. Rick cracked his knuckles, laughing. "Kid, I'm talking to you. Maybe you need a lesson in respect." He reached forward, and in that moment, Clint Eastwood finally moved. Clint Eastwood tilted his head slightly, his weathered face unreadable. Then, in a voice as calm as a slow-drawn revolver, he finally spoke. "Son, I'd rethink that next move." Rick paused mid-reach, his fingers just inches from the boy's shirt. He turned, frowning at the old man sitting in the corner. "What was that?" Clint didn't repeat himself. He just stared. The kind of stare that made men hesitate, made them question everything they thought they knew about a situation. The gas station felt smaller now, like the walls were pressing in. One of the bikers, the one with the snake tattoo, scoffed. "What's this, huh? Some old cowboy thinks he's got something to say?" Clint casually lifted his coffee cup, took a slow sip, then set it down. His hands remained steady, unmoved by the tension in the room. His voice remained level, barely above a whisper, yet it carried like a gunshot. "You boys got about 5 seconds to leave that kid alone." The gas station fell into a thick, unnatural silence. The boy's wide eyes darted between Clint and the bikers, his pulse pounding in his ears. Rick let out a loud, exaggerated laugh. His crew followed suit, though it was clear they were laughing more out of expectation than genuine amusement. Rick turned back to Clint, his smirk widening. "You serious, old man? You think you can tell us what to do?" Clint leaned back in his chair, studying them like a poker player, sizing up a losing hand. "Not thinking," he said simply. "Knowing?" The snake-tattooed biker stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "Man, this ain't a movie. You're just some washed-up has-been. Ain't nobody scared of you." Clint exhaled, slow and patient. His fingers tapped idly against the table. "That so?" Rick leaned in, his grin turning predatory. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Clint lifted his chin just slightly, his sharp eyes locking onto Rick's. "Neither do you." For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed Rick's face. It was brief, barely there, but Clint caught it. The kid caught it. Everyone in the gas station caught it. But Rick wasn't about to back down. Not in front of his crew. Not in front of an audience. He turned back to the boy, his smirk returning. But this time, there was something forced about it. "You know what? Forget him," he said, waving Clint off. "This ain't about some old man with a death wish." He stepped closer to the boy again, his voice dropping to a taunting whisper. "You think he's gonna save you? He ain't gonna do a damn thing." Clint's chair scraped back against the floor. The sound cut through the room like the cocking of a revolver. The tension snapped tight. The cashier swallowed hard. A man, near the magazine rack, shifted his stance, ready to bolt. Rick and his crew turned fully toward Clint now, their grins fading. The easy arrogance they had just moments ago was cracking, but they weren't ready to admit it. Not yet. Snake Tattoo sneered. "What, old man? You gonna fight all of us?" Clint rolled his shoulders, stretching slightly like a man preparing for a long, familiar task. His voice was even, smooth as aged whiskey. "No." He adjusted his hat, looking them over one last time. "I'm going to put you in the ground." Silence, heavy, absolute. Rick blinked, then let out another forced laugh. "You got a real mouth on you, Grandpa." He turned to his crew. "Let's teach him what happens when you run your mouth to the wrong people." Clint's fingers flexed at his sides, his stance as steady as the earth itself. The fight was a-coming, and nobody in that gas station would ever forget what happened next. Rick was the first to move. With a wild snarl, he lunged at Clint, swinging a meaty fist straight for the old man's face. He never connected. Clint stepped aside like he was sidestepping a tumbleweed. Rick's punch cut through the air, and before he could even register what had happened, Clint struck. A swift, hammer-like elbow smashed into Rick's ribs, folding him in half. The biker let out a strangled grunt, stumbling forward, gasping for air. Before Rick could recover, Clint grabbed him by the back of the neck and slammed his forehead into the counter. The impact rattled the entire gas station, knocking over a display of gum and lottery tickets. The cashier let out a shocked gasp. Snake Tattoo cursed and charged, drawing a knife from his belt. Bad move. Clint caught his wrist mid-swing, twisting it with the kind of practiced precision that only comes from decades of experience. The biker's face contorted in pain as the blade clattered to the floor. Then, with one fluid motion, Clint wrenched the biker's arm downward and snapped his elbow against the counter. A sickening crack echoed through the gas station. Snake Tattoo screamed, cradling his broken arm as he staggered backward. The third biker, a massive brute with a shaved head, let out a roar and rushed in like a charging bull. He swung wildly, his fists the size of cinder blocks. Clint ducked under the first swing. The second came a split second later. He swayed back just enough to let it pass by his chin, his expression never changing. Then, with the swiftness of a striking rattlesnake, Clint delivered a brutal gut punch. The big man doubled over instantly, his breath whooshing out of his lungs. Before he could recover, Clint grabbed him by the collar and, using nothing but sheer force, body-slammed him onto the tile floor. The entire gas station shook from the impact. The last remaining biker, a wiry guy with a chain around his neck, hesitated. His eyes darted from his fallen friends to Clint, who hadn't even broken a sweat. "Come on, man, we were just messing around," the biker stammered, taking a step back. Clint tilted his head slightly, as if considering. Then he stepped forward. The biker panicked. He grabbed a metal chair and swung it at Clint's head. Bad choice. Clint caught the chair mid-air, yanked it from the biker's grasp and, before the fool could react, brought it down over his head with a bone-rattling crash. The biker collapsed instantly. Silence. The entire gas station stood still, the only sound being the groans of the broken and battered bikers scattered across the floor. Rick, still clutching his ribs, coughed and spat onto the tile. He glared up at Clint with fury and humiliation burning in his eyes. You're dead, old man," he snarled, reaching into his leather vest. Clint didn't even blink. Rick's fingers barely touched the handle of his concealed gun before, bang, a shot rang out. Rick froze. Clint hadn't drawn a gun, but the bullet hole, now smoking just an inch from Rick's hand, made it clear. Someone else had. Slowly, Rick turned his head. The gas station cashier, nervous, shaking but determined, was standing behind the counter, holding a smoking revolver. Her voice wavered, but she stood her ground. You better listen to him." Rick swallowed hard, his face pale. His fingers twitched, but he didn't dare go for the gun now. Clint finally spoke, his voice calm as ever. "I warned you." Rick's jaw clenched. Then, with all the pride of a man who knew he'd lost, he lowered his hand and let the gun drop. Clint took one slow step forward, towering over Rick. He leaned in close, his voice just above a whisper. Now get your sorry hides out of here before I decide to make this lesson permanent." Rick, panting, shot one last glare at Clint before scrambling to his feet. He grabbed Snake Tattoo by his good arm and hauled him up. The other bikers, battered and groaning, slowly stumbled toward the exit. They left without another word. As the door swung shut behind them, Clint exhaled slowly and turned back to the boy. "You okay, kid?" The boy nodded, still wide-eyed. The cashier let out a nervous laugh, lowering the revolver. "Holy hell, that was—" She shook her head. "Who are you?" Clint adjusted his hat, gave her a small nod, and without another word, turned toward the door. As he stepped outside, he muttered, just loud enough for them to hear, "Just an old man who doesn't like bullies." And with that, he walked into the night, leaving behind a story that no one in that gas station would ever forget. Outside the gas station, the defeated bikers hobbled toward their motorcycles, groaning in pain. Rick clutched his ribs, still gasping for breath. Snake Tattoo cradled his broken arm, his face twisted in agony. The others limped behind them, humiliated and battered. A few bystanders who had been watching from the parking lot finally stepped forward. Some had their phones out, recording everything. "You see that?" one man said, shaking his head in disbelief. "That was Clint Eastwood. Man just took down a whole gang like it was nothing." Another man whistled. "Guess them bikers picked the wrong guy to mess with." A woman in her 50s, standing near her car, shook her head at the groaning men. "Serves them right," she muttered. The young black boy, still wide-eyed, watched the bikers shuffle away. He looked down at his worn sneakers, his fists clenched. Then suddenly he turned and ran toward Clint, who was walking toward his car. "Sir, wait," the boy called out. Clint paused, turning slightly. The boy swallowed, then looked up at him with tear-filled eyes. "Thank you." His voice was quiet, but filled with something deeper. Relief, gratitude, admiration. Clint nodded once. "I ain't right. What they did." The boy hesitated, then wiped his eyes. I was scared. I didn't think anyone would help." Clint's expression softened, if only slightly. "Bullies like them count on that. But there's always someone watching. You remember that?" Before the boy could say more, the distant wail of sirens filled the air. Rick's eyes widened as flashing red and blue lights appeared down the road. "Cops!" one of the bikers hissed. Rick spat blood onto the pavement, glancing around. His gang was in no condition to fight. He knew the witnesses had caught everything on video. If they got arrested now, it'd be a long road ahead. He clenched his jaw, seething with rage, then glared back at Clint. "This ain't over, old man." Clint didn't even flinch. He simply adjusted his hat, eyes calm as ever. Rick spat again and turned. "Let's go," he barked at his crew. The bikers scrambled onto their motorcycles, revving their engines. Tires screeched as they sped off down the road, disappearing into the night. Seconds later, 2 police cruisers pulled into the lot, lights flashing. Officers jumped out, hands on their holsters, scanning the scene. "What happened here?" one of them asked, eyeing the shaken crowd. The gas station cashier stepped forward, still gripping the revolver in her shaking hands. "Those guys, those bikers, they were harassing this kid, and then he stepped in." She pointed at Clint. "Took him down like it was nothing." The officers exchanged glances before looking at Clint. "That true?" Clint simply shrugged. Just a couple of troublemakers getting what was coming to them. A few bystanders rushed forward, holding up their phones. "We got it all on video," one man said, every bit of it. The officers relaxed slightly, their hands moving away from their weapons. One of them let out a low whistle. "Well, damn," he muttered, shaking his head. "Looks like you did us a favor, sir." Clint tipped his hat. "Did what needed doing." The officer exhaled, then turned to his partner. "Put out a BOLO on those bikers. We'll have their plates from the footage." The other officer nodded and stepped away to radio dispatch. Meanwhile, the cashier let out a nervous laugh. "Man, I don't think I've ever seen anything like that in my life." One of the officers turned back to Clint. "If you'd like to give a formal statement." But when they looked, Clint was already walking away. The boy watched as the old legend climbed into his truck, started the engine, and pulled out of the lot. He never looked back. As the truck disappeared into the night, the boy clenched his fists at his sides. He wasn't afraid anymore. And he'd never forget the day Clint Eastwood stood up for him. The gas station parking lot slowly returned to normal. The flashing police lights dimmed as the officers wrapped up their questioning. People murmured amongst themselves, replaying the shocking events in their minds. But the young black boy stood still, his gaze fixed on the road where Clint Eastwood had disappeared. He felt different now, stronger, safer. For years he had believed the world was unfair, that people like him had to endure cruelty in silence. But tonight proved otherwise. Someone had stood up for him. Someone had fought back. And not just anyone. Clint Eastwood. The boy clenched his fists, his heart swelling with something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. A nearby officer placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You okay, kid?" The boy looked up, nodding. "Yeah, I think I am." The cashier smiled at him. "That man, he didn't just fight for you. He taught you something, didn't he?" The boy nodded again, his voice steadier now. "Yeah, he did." The officer patted his shoulder once more before heading back to the squad car. The bystanders eventually dispersed, shaking their heads in amazement. The night carried on, but something had changed. Somewhere down the road, inside his truck, Clint Eastwood drove in silence, his hands steady on the wheel. He didn't need recognition. He didn't need applause. He had done what needed to be done. Because real strength isn't about proving how tough you are. It's about standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves. It's about justice. And sometimes, justice comes in the form of an old gunslinger who refuses to let bullies win. Now to you, the viewer, what would you do in this situation? Would you step in to protect someone being mistreated? Or would you stand by, hoping someone else would take action? The world needs more people willing to stand up for what's right. If you believe in justice, in courage, in doing the right thing, then show your support. Like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Because heroes aren't just in movies, they walk among us every day. And maybe the next one could be you.